Thanks for joining us for Lad Advice Encounters with me, Gav Topley and Friends. I'm delighted to be joined today by the Army Sergeant Major Paul Carney, and we're speaking to you from St John's College, Cambridge University. So thanks, first of all, Sergeant Major, for making the trip up to Cambridge. It's great to see you.
No, thank you for having me. Such a stunning setting.
If we could start by talking a little bit about yourself. Obviously, you're a really prominent figure within the Army, and we'll get on to speak about exactly what the Army Sergeant Major is as a role and what your position is and what you do. But maybe you could tell us a little bit about yourself and how you've ended up where you are at this point.
So I joined the Army about 25 years ago now as an Army apprentice in the Royal Engineers as an electrician. So the start of my career was 2 years of training before my first assignment to Germany, which was really important for me. I joined the Army to see the world, and the stories of Germany during my training was a place to go and see. And it didn't let me down. Being in the centre of Europe is fantastic. That led to operations beginning in Macedonia to then move into Kosovo. And I then had a career in and around the Royal Engineers and other CAT badges, both in close support combat engineering, so supporting the infantry, and some construction as well, supporting the RAF, and probably further back on the battlefield than the infantry would expect to be.
Sure, and then if we could take a step back even before then, I believe you joined the Army at 16, is that?
No, 17.
17.
So I just turned 17, and as I said, I was an apprentice, so a sustained period of time, which I think not only built my educational skills to help me become an electrician, but also really built on my soldering skills. There wasn't that need to cram everything in to such a short period of time. So I left being able to map read properly, being able to move with my equipment, and hopefully be able to soldier.
Brilliant. And what would you say underpinned that decision to join the Army? Is there a family history or?
So I do have a family history with the military. My dad served for a short time. My grandparents were in the Navy. But for me, I think back, and it was probably the first Royal tournament I saw. And dare I say it, the Royal Marines abseiling down from the roof made me want to join the Army from that moment on. I was, I think what they say is a core intender. I was always going to join the Army if they let me.
Brilliant. And when you joined the Army, did you anticipate that would be a career, or was it something that you wanted to join to get the trade and get out? Did you anticipate you'd end up in the position you're in now?
I certainly didn't think I'd be in the position I am in now, but I really, really wanted to stay in the Army. I was one of those that regularly joked that I'd be a lifer, and then as I went on in my career and promoted and saw more and more, I think like many soldiers, I've always said that the day it gets boring or I lose interest was the day I was going to get out. And fortunately for me, that hasn't happened.
For sure. And so obviously we've spoken a little bit about the Lads Advice Group, where as we grow, we tend to be between 30 and 50% military and veterans, and then the rest civilians. So many of the people listening to this might not have an idea about what a Sergeant Major does, let alone what the Army Sergeant Major does. I can remember my granddad making a comment, I don't know the reference, something about you horrible little man, and the Sergeant Major being quite a disciplinary role. Could you tell us a little bit about what the Army Sergeant Major role is? I believe you're the third Army Sergeant Major, so it's a relatively recent thing for the British Army, and what exactly is that the Army Sergeant Major does in that role?
So you're right, I am the third Army Sergeant Major, and we've been going for about 8 years now, which is behind most other countries. A lot of people think we sort of follow the American system, but actually most countries have a senior Sergeant Major supporting their senior commanders. So my job is primarily as an advisor to the head of the Army, CGS for the military ones that are on this line. And I'm almost what some would refer to as a workplace director. So I bring the points of view and an opinion from the workplace, or a unit in our case, and our soldiers, all the way to the highest level of command in the Army. So what I bring is advice from what people are feeling down the bottom, but also a bit of diversity to the board and another point of view, because a group of Army officers in a headquarters can start to have an element of groupthink. And it's my job to get in and amongst the army and bring those points of view.
And so do you think in many ways, of course, the rank gives you the position and the authority to speak to CGS and people at that senior level. Can it be a barrier, do you think, for some of the more junior soldiers in feeling able to speak to the sort of badge of the Army Sergeant Major? And if so, how do you overcome that?
So I'm there to represent both our soldiers and our units. And for me, we should all be approachable. I talk about a Sunday League football team. So a junior soldier around 18 years old and myself in my early 40s. If we played on the same football team, we'd go to the pub or a social setting and have drinks and talk to each other and engage all the time. In the army, sometimes we put that rank on and suddenly that relationship disappears. So I try to do my best to be able to be approachable to my soldiers and encourage them to discuss with me. So I try to gain common ground that we can discuss on, and I seek their advice and support. It's my job to represent them, and I ask them what they do, because we're so diverse in the jobs that we deliver in the army that not one person will ever have the same journey throughout that.
For sure, and obviously, as the Army Sergeant Major, you're one person trying to put across the views of a lot of people in a big organisation, and that requires you to engage on various platforms. We had a really engaging chat before the podcast, which ran on for quite a while, so we're quite late recording it. But one of the things we spoke about is Twitter, and I personally find that Twitter can be quite a difficult environment. How do you deal with that? Because we're going to go on to speak about mental health and about coping strategies, but obviously being in such a prominent place where you might be subject to abuse from faceless figures online. How does that affect you? How do you deal with it? And then how do you find having to manage that?
So Twitter, social media are funny places, and I'll put my hand up. I'm a little bit of a Neanderthal in that space, but I've certainly learned that there's probably an importance for someone like my character to be on there and show that I'm active. And a few of my friends and colleagues have reached out to me and said that it's important to engage. I don't have to do it all the time, and it would be a waste of my time talking to that audience when actually I need to concentrate within the army. Mm-hmm. For me, yes, you get beaten up. We try to build resilience in our people, and I've had 25 years of building resilience in myself. And if someone's happy enough to call me out in person, I will gladly have that conversation with them. What I don't like is the ability that Twitter can be faceless and anyone feels comfortable to throw abuse to people. But again, I always say to them, I'm there to learn, feedback to me, and I'll try to make myself better both on those platforms, and then offer myself up for discussions, usually through direct messaging, because I don't think it's necessary to have an argument for everyone to see.
Absolutely. And on that point of resilience, we spoke a little bit about, well, two things. First of all, the army is, as we mentioned, a hierarchical structure, which I think is something that can work both ways, but also in terms of the need as a soldier. Ultimately you might be deployed into an operational theatre, and you need to be able to depend on the guy to your left and your right in that situation. So we also spoke about bullying, and that being something that you really are against and dislike on an individual level. So how do we balance that in terms of getting it right so that people are able to build that resilience they need, but also to make sure that the army as an institution is not a place where people might experience bullying?
So I think building resilience is important. The world is constantly changing, and everyone's an individual. So it's important, firstly, that we create an understanding of people as individuals, so that we can then build our team. For me, the bullying piece is just horrible. I've been lucky that most of my career I've not experienced bullying, discrimination, or harassment, and I want everyone to have that same journey. I think bullying or bullies tend to be hiding behind things, and bullying is their way of getting out of it, or maybe being seen. I think for me, with the resilience piece, and I hear it from some people that we need to toughen our people up, but that's what our training is there for. people shouldn't be building resilience every single day. In a similar vein that Usain Bolt isn't at the top of his game every single time or every single moment of the day because he'd break. That's kind of the same in that mental health space, that if someone is constantly on edge, has to lock their door at night because they feel they're going to be bullied or attacked or harassed, then how are they going to be ready to deal with challenges on the battlefield? So we have our training, and in that, some people tend to have a mental switch that they turn on to be able to set their conditions, set their body and their mind ready to deliver stuff that's out of the ordinary. And that's why we have exercises. Those are the times to put people under hardship and pressure because they're controlled environments.
Yep.
We then pull people out of that controlled environment, send them back to their rooms, back to their houses. And that's when we need to ease off that push.
Absolutely. And so sort of making sure that people are, I guess, able to be tested to make sure that they are suitable for the role in a safe environment, where there's not going to be a tragic outcome if things don't go right. And then I guess those training needs can be met if someone is lacking in those environments. Is that what you'd say? Yeah,
exactly that. And on a smaller scale, the battle PT, the green PT, the log races, these are things that bed in that resilience. We've all done a PT session as an example where we think PT's over, we go running past the gym and that PTI just keeps running and we might go on to do another mile. And that then builds just another little bit of resilience, but it's in a really controlled environment where if someone is struggling or suffering, we've got people there to support.
For sure. And so having gotten through that training and demonstrated that resilience, obviously, mental health is something that is quite it's a scale and it's changeable and it can happen at various points in people's career. Sometimes I've spoken to soldiers who have said they've been experiencing difficulty, but they're worried about coming forward. They don't want to be seen as what they might term the admin case, and in that case, they might think that their problem is not that serious, or that if they come forward, they might be seen as trying to shirk or get away from their responsibilities, and that might then have a direct impact on their career. If someone's thinking like that, what would you advise them? What would your advice to them be? Sorry.
So my first would be to use our medical chain. Our medical chain's there for a reason, and they will provide the support, and they don't live with you day to day. But I'd also seek that support from your chain of command. Now, everyone likes to talk about mental health being blind compared to a physical break. So we use the broken leg analogy, that when you see a cast on someone's leg, that means it's acceptable for them not to do PT. But the second part to that is that people know that because they know what having a big cast on your leg looks like. I think we need to continue to push our chains of command and our people to understand that no one's trained to understand mental health. And if someone's struggling with their mental health, they're going through an experience that probably no one else ever has done. And so we need to give them the time and the space. So I guess for the people that feel that they are struggling, going to their chain of command is the first part. But then I'd ask from our chain of command that they give people time and understanding.
For sure. And what about sort of the grassroots level of the other lads and lasses within the regiment? So if someone is struggling and perhaps hasn't felt able to come forward, and maybe this is a friend of theirs, what would you advise them is a course of action?
They need to support each other. We work on teamwork. And so I've been to units now where I chat to the junior NCOs, and when people have made it clear to them that they're struggling, they've got around them and they've supported them. And we are not all going to be perfect all of the time, but we tend to want to look after our team and work together and bring forward. So if a friend of mine came to me, I would encourage them to reach out. And if not, if they feel that they're not getting the support that's required, that's what we have a chain of command for, to then maybe go up to the next level as chain of command.
For sure. And we spoke a little bit earlier, sort of off mic, about consistency across the Army. Obviously, the Army is a big organisation. Do you think there is consistency in terms of support for people who are struggling? And if not, what can we do to improve that?
So I don't think we're as consistent as we want to be, and I'd be naive to think any otherwise. And because of the hierarchical nature of our organisation, it means that single personalities can have a huge difference on a unit. I think we're trying to get around it now with training. So OpSmart has been absolutely fantastic and been going around and delivering that mental health and mental resilience training. And that will soon devolve down to unit levels so that we will have mental health and mental fitness trainers within each unit. And I think it just takes time to build that in. And if we hit our junior NCOs with that training and that development, that we can help grow that through the army. So it just becomes a matter of course, as opposed to something out of the blue.
And so for anyone who's listening that's not heard of OpSmart, could you perhaps tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so OpSmart is optimizing performance through mental health and fitness training. And we brought it in a couple of years ago because we saw a gap. We were doing a lot of physical training, but not necessarily training the mind. And it started off with a small team that would go around and deliver to our units on 2 separate courses, predominantly mental health awareness training and mental resilience training. Mm-hmm. And both fantastic sort of elements to the team itself. But we realized that we needed to get more and more people trained. So we have now expanded that, and we hope to devolve the training down so that each unit has its own mental fitness trainers and train the trainers in the future.
Brilliant. And so we spoke earlier a little bit about people who struggle and might be worried about being seen as the admin case. And actually, you know, I commented earlier when we were not in the interview that actually, if people are using things as an excuse, that's being seen in that way is not going to stop them. And actually, if you're worried about being seen as an admin case, then probably that's not you, and probably there is a genuine problem. However small that is, coming forward early on means that might get resolved more quickly. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I do. So a really big thing for me, and a message that I push all the time, is ownership and taking responsibility. And as you and me were discussing earlier, that people not taking responsibility is a real trigger for me. So if you can understand and are aware that it's starting to impact you as a person, then it is on you to reach out for that help, because it tends to be, and I'm no doctor, but it tends to be that if you don't do something about it, it's only going to get worse. Yeah. And it will be harder to fix or to support and deliver that aid. So in the same way that if you start getting a niggling pain in your leg, if you leave that to go on and continue to do PT, chances are that injury is going to get worse and take longer to fix. I think it's the same in that mental health space.
For sure. And overwhelmingly, where we've had young men on the group reach out and they've been serving armed forces personnel, and we've spoken on their behalf to change the command, the response has been absolutely brilliant up and down the chain of command. But obviously, as we've spoken about earlier, it's a big organisation and there might be some inconsistency. So if you were to come forward and find that you felt you're not being supported in your unit, what steps could you then take if you find yourself in that position?
So the joy of the army is that we actually put quite a big wrap around people, and sometimes it can feel that wrap's not there. So I would always advise that the chain of command is your first port of call. But most units will also have a padre that will be able to offer sometimes pastoral support, but just support in general, and a voice to speak to. And they're quite wise in what they do and understand the dynamics of army life, and so can help and advise you there and give you a voice to the right level of chain of command that you might not have the confidence to do. And in turn, there's the welfare officers as well. Mm-hmm. The welfare officers will tend to be in a different part of camp or sometimes off of camp to allow you that freedom. And many are still serving, although we have some civilian welfare officers, but they're always in civilians to kind of break down that rank barrier I was talking about before. Sure. And allow you to open up. And again, they will speak to you, offer you advice, and try to get round maybe that little nook that isn't working out for you at that time.
And so you've spoken a little bit about reaching out for help if you are serving. We've spoken a little bit about what to do if your oppo is struggling and then perhaps reaching out to you but not able to reach out further. There might be situations where someone is deployed or on exercise or not in the UK, or even if they are in the UK and friends or family might become concerned about them and might not really know how to go about accessing support, particularly where that's someone who might be at the point of crisis and it might be quite urgent to get that help. Could you give us some information on what someone in that situation might be able to do to help in that sort of at that point of crisis?
So the first port of call is our welfare offices, and if you go online, you know the unit of that friend or family member that's a concern. I would Google their unit and welfare office, and they may be able to give you a contact number. Mm-hmm. Every unit has someone on welfare support for 24 hours a day. Mm-hmm. On top of that, there's orderly officers, but when people are deployed, it's probably the hardest time to try and get hold of an individual. And if people go onto Google and just search the Joint Casualty and Compassionate Centre for the Army and wider defence, known as JCCC, they're an organisation that is manned 24 hours a day, 365 days a week. And they will understand, take the problem, speak to you about that problem, and then we'll get that information to whoever requires it as soon as possible.
Absolutely brilliant. And so that's sort of out of hours as well. You can get hold of those and they'll action
completely and utterly. And it's when you do put that into Google, it's a government site and the contact number's there, so they will be able to offer you advice, points of contact, or they in turn will reach out.
Fantastic. Because we've rabbited on for so long, we are more short of time than we'd like to have been. So I'm going to move on shortly on some questions that have been asked by lads who are members of the group who are serving or otherwise. I did have a question raised by one of the combat medics, and he was querying the training that combat medics get as part of their training around mental health and asking whether that might be something that might be able to be extended. And that's probably something a bit of a putting you on the spot kind of a question, really. But is that something that will be wrapped into the training that comes off the back of the training we previously discussed that's going to be rolled out? Or do you think there's a need for more specific training as the first point of contact? Or is it more a case that, you're speaking to the medic as someone you've got a bit of rapport with and then they'll refer to the doctor?
Yeah, so I couldn't speak directly on combat medic training. At the moment, the OpSmart team that will move into this further training will be offered to everyone within units, and there's a slow build up to being able to deliver the sort of training package to becoming a trainer and developing expertise and experience. The natural crossover to the combat medics, I genuinely couldn't answer, but it's a question I'll go to the medical corps colonel and see what their ambitions are with that regard. However, I do tend to think that the combat medic is there to deal with almost life-threatening injuries. Mm-hmm. Not to say that some mental health cases at the far right-hand side aren't, but in that sort of war battle environment to then be passed on to more clinical care.
For sure, yeah, and I think there's some primary health stuff with the medics running the individual soldier that I was speaking to was talking about more in the UK context when he's sort of in the barracks and the lads come and talk to him, that he felt like he had got a skill set, but that it was a skill set that maybe could be more formally delivered. So, as I say, that's a good question for you to take forward with.
Yes, and I'll take that away. And I think for in barracks, the courses we're talking about will probably work for a medical combat medic as much as it will for any other person in the unit. But it's good that people are coming to them to ask questions.
One of the themes that comes out in the group, and not necessarily only in the military, but it seems in wider society at the moment, is that of authentic connection and loneliness. And in the military context, there are conversations about the type of accommodation that soldiers are now housed in and the effect of that on connectivity between soldiers in day-to-day life and the knock-on of mental health. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so it's funny. When I was a younger soldier, the only way you got your own room was if you promoted and become a junior NCO. And so the army fixed what was deemed a problem at the time. People wanted their own room and they wanted their space. And I think that there has been, there's almost been a backlash with that, the belonging campaign that we recruit our soldiers for.
Yep.
And as they go through basic training and further trade training, they remain in grouped rooms where you could argue actually is the time that they're all going through the same experience. And then they'll go to a unit where they're the new person in the unit, whatever their perception is of that, and they're put in a single room where it's quite easy to lock the door and close yourself in, as opposed to being part of this new team that you belong to. So if I was to redesign rooms, they would be in 4-person flats, which would still give someone a small independent space, so that they can be by themselves if they need to, but actually focuses on a communal room in the centre and a communal shower room, communal kitchen. So it actually encourages that interaction and that development. So it's not just a closed door and disappear off. I do think, though, that a lot of people are now starting to get after this, and we see when I get round and chat to soldiers, a lot will leave their rooms open and their corridors will intermingle throughout the evenings, and will tend to only close off when they're on phone calls or chatting with family and friends. So there are areas that we're trying, and having spoke with the Fusiliers last week, they're getting some communal pods to be put outside their accommodation. They're going to trial to see what they're like. So they can hold a maximum of 40 people, are decked out with game systems, sofas, kitchens, to try and encourage that pulling people together, which is teamwork is kind of what we're about in the army.
Absolutely. And so the accommodation being what it is, obviously that's not going to change overnight. Would you say the onus then is on the existing soldiers need to get around new bods, or for the new person to try and put themselves out there, or a bit of both?
No, it's easy to say to the young new person, put yourself out there, but we can be a quite intimidating organisation. And remember, perception's key here. So everyone joins, everyone hears the war stories, what happened when they first got to the block, and we've done a lot now to quell that. But for me, it's not about putting it on the individual. And I'll just tell a quick story, which was when I was a regimental sergeant major. I had an open door policy, and my junior NCOs used it quite a lot. And I had one of my better corporals. He came in one day and, in a sort of gobby, cocky sense, said to me, "Sir, do you want me to tell you where you're going wrong?" Intrigued by this visit, I asked him to sit down. Very bold, yeah. I asked him to sit down and explain. And he talked about the fact that the best junior NCOs were always busy because, their commanders wanted to use them, and that's understandable. So what would happen is the new soldier would come in and would be mentored by someone that might be getting out of the army, someone that might have been disaffected and don't really care. And that young soldier then gets walked around and talked to for a week by someone that doesn't necessarily like the army for what it is anymore, and doesn't necessarily have the protection that one of the other corporals could do. So he said, albeit there may be a bit of front-end pain by losing the corporal to have that mentor with them, they offer a psychological protection to that new soldier. Yeah. A feeling that they're brought into the group straight away, because, hey, if the junior commander's looking after me, then that's great. And the junior commander also has the opportunity to instill in that soldier the culture and the ethos of that unit and ways of getting on in their career and taking advantage of the opportunities that the army offers.
And so at the other end of that cycle, coming to the end of your career, or maybe you're leaving the army early on, we spoke about the wraparound of support in terms of connection, accommodation, skills, self-worth, confidence, and all these things that we know the army are brilliant at offering. Do you have any advice for someone who might be preparing either at the end of their career or to leave early, what they can do to get themselves ready so that they do sort of fall on their feet if they do choose to leave the army?
So I think my first bit is open to everyone, even people that aren't thinking of leaving, is that you should be aiming off that you're going to leave at a moment's notice, because you don't know what's going to happen in life, and you should be setting yourself up for life outside the military at every occasion. And I've tried to do that in my career. Tend to have ups and downs. We'll do something, leave it a couple of years, do something else. So that would be my first point of view, is always have a mindset that you are going to get out one day. I think it's about engagement. If you're thinking about getting out, then you need to engage with the outside world and understand it. Like we talked about that young soldier coming into a unit being a scary place, I'd be petrified after 25 years in the army of going out to civilian streets. I don't know it and I'm not aware. So by being able to soft touch and understand what that world is like is really important. And sites like yours are perfect for that. People that you can reach out to, ask what it's like, and gain that understanding. I think the next piece is to understand that you should never be too proud. Mm-hmm. We as a military look after our people very, very well. And sometimes people forget about all those extra bits, the small bits that we take for granted whilst we're in the military, that feeling of pure security. I could be run down tomorrow and I'd be put in a hospital bed and the army would continue to pay me and would have people to support me until I was back in. And if I wasn't ever of the physical level, they would probably give me a medical pension as I went out. Mm-hmm. That's the type of security that you will get in very few other places. So you need to understand that you're not provided with that as you go out. And that's not to say not to get out, but to engage with the host of charities and support agencies that the military have available to you. Mm-hmm. They have a lot of money. They have a lot of qualified people and experienced people of dealing with that transition. And I would suggest that they wouldn't have as much money if people used them when they needed to.
For sure. And so we spoke earlier as well about the sort of the drug culture in wider society and CDT and so on and so forth. And there have been a couple of occasions where there have been serving soldiers on the site who have come forward, who are going through difficulties, who are involving themselves with illegal drugs. What would your advice be to those people in that situation?
So that's a really difficult one because we don't accept drug taking in the army. I would seek external support. I would take that moment of reflection to understand why you're taking drugs. What are you missing in your life, or what are you trying to mask? Without me trying to talk like a counsellor, it's a very difficult path. We, in as such, with how we deal with people that take drugs in the army, with a borderline zero tolerance policy, it's very difficult. I'd suggest to reach out for help. Yeah. If someone's an alcoholic, someone's a gambler, then we'd offer that support on top. Mm-hmm. I don't think we necessarily do that in the army. Yeah. So I would, if your choice is to want to remain in our organisation, that you stop at the earliest opportunity and seek help more externally based. Sure. It's not something I've ever experienced from a personal point of view of that happening. Mm-hmm. So I'd be hard to understand what path would go next.
And again, in terms, as you said, there are external organisations. In terms of the group, Lads Advice, if you are a member on there, you can reach out to one of the admins or moderators, and we can direct you and signpost you to that support as well. And there's also the facility to post anonymously, where if you post anonymously, when you reply to comments, it also comes up anonymous, so no one necessarily needs to know who's seeking that help, and of course you get that confidentiality from us. Can we talk about catering? I know one of the friends of our group is Alfie from Philly Boots, and that's something that often comes up on his site. It's been outsourced. That was outsourced for a number of years now. Is that right?
It is, yeah.
And does that limit the input that the army has at unit level on what's provided, or can you talk us through that process?
Yeah, so when I was younger, the old system used to be a certain amount of money would come out of your bank each month, and you had access to the cookhouse, which would feed you 3 square meals. Mm-hmm. And where, and I know we'll probably go on to it earlier, where the current concern is beards in the British Army. At my time when I was younger, it was the fact that people were paying for food that they weren't necessarily eating. So soldiers would pay for meals for the whole month, but wouldn't necessarily be eating at the weekend. What they failed to see was that the money that wasn't spent at the weekend was spent on them during the week. So you could almost have steak every night, as an example. So it was contracted out. It wasn't sustainable, that model, and we had to employ a lot of army chefs. So we had a contracted solution. Now there are set rules to that contract, where people are entitled to what we call a core meal, which is relatively cheap. I think it's still under £5 for 3 meals a day, but that limits the options. By contracting it out, and for the contractors to be able to gain a profit, they will offer other meals that might be more appealing, which will cost more.
Sure.
So it feels much more like a restaurant than necessarily a military cookhouse where you've got a choice of 3 options.
Yeah.
Now that works on the bigger camps because there's a lot of footfall and there's a lot of people going through. I think it works less so on our independent camps and our ones that are tucked away. But what I will say is that the chain of command can always engage with the contractors if things aren't being done right. The food is of substandard quality, and it's about maintaining a good relationship between the contractor and the military. So there is elements that our chain of command can pull on and use. What I will say, though, is they're a contractor. So if you went to a restaurant and you weren't happy with the meal, you'd complain and expect it to be replaced. We have a military mindset where we just get on with it. So rather than complain, we'll take a picture of it, maybe post it on social media, and then put up with whatever food we were put on, rather than going back to the contractor and saying, my food is cold, or my food is undercooked, or my food is of substandard quality. I want another one. And that's a mindset that we need to kind of get into our soldiers.
For sure.
To get the most out of the contract. And I'm not going to absolutely batter the contract and it's delivered by multiple organisations, but they are a business. They've got to make money, and delivering to what every type of soldier wants is difficult and expensive. So it's trying to find that balance of what our soldiers want, what's financially acceptable, and trying to get a good middle ground.
But where the quality is not there, as you say, you can bring it up yourself, and the training commander there to support you if you don't feel able to do that. Yes,
and I think that's the point. Is firstly, take your food back and complain. If the contract tries to push against that, then that's where you engage the chain of command, and the chain of command should put the pressure on the contractor in that regard.
I'm aware a little bit short of time now. You're due to go out and see some of your soldiers in the local area. So I'll give you some quick fire questions from the group, if that's all right. We had a bit of a vote, and it was decided overwhelmingly 56-5 that I should sport a beard for this interview. So that's why I'm looking a bit scruffy today with this bedraggled facial hair. But could you talk a little bit about your ideas for policy around beards? Obviously, the RAF are allowed, the Navy are allowed. The lads are feeling a bit hard done to. Should they be feeling hard done to, and what do you see as the future for that?
So firstly, at least your beard's the same colour. I think when I grow one, it is about 4 different shades. But so firstly, which will probably go down negatively on the podcast, is that we joined an army that told us that we needed to shave. It wasn't hidden. There was no promise that 5 years into your service you'd be able to grow a beard. But that's not to say that we shouldn't. And I think it's very clear that in the army today we encourage challenge, and that's what our soldiers are doing at the moment. They're challenging us, and so us as a headquarters should look into reviewing that. The last review that was carried out was predominantly based on the impact of growing beards on retention and recruiting, and actually it had very little impact. But it's not to say that we shouldn't continue to look at this, and I expect there to be another review this year.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. I'm scrolling through here, and a lot of these questions we've actually already touched on. There's a question here for someone who's not serving. What's your greatest life lesson from working in the army for someone who's never served, as it's an interesting perspective that some of us will never see?
So I think it's the importance that no one knows everything. I've spent a life. I done a construction task in Cyprus. So I was a sergeant. It was a predominantly plumber based task, and it just so happened that my plumber was the youngest person within our unit. So by virtue of his skill set, meant that he by de facto became the commander. And so we shouldn't be caught up by age or rank, or even experience. Actually, we should take the time to listen to everyone, listen to their ideas, and guess what? More people will come forward and offer them.
I think it's brilliant advice. And an ex-girlfriend of mine, who is still a good friend, she's at the forefront of drone technology for the emergency services. And as a young female, found that she wasn't being taken seriously. And in fact, she did some experiments by email where she made it not so obvious about her gender, talking to the same people, and got very different responses. So I think you're exactly right there in terms of taking people at their experience level. Can you use a day sack at night?
A day sack?
Can you use a day sack at night? It was always going to be this, wasn't it?
I guess so.
What tips would you give to develop mental toughness for people who have never experienced army life and have, and I quote, soft office jobs?
So I'd put yourself out there. I think the army's very good, and if you kind of follow the news at the moment, we've got Polar Preet that's just independently skied down to the South Pole. We've got an independent junior NCO, so a young corporal that's rowing the Atlantic by himself. And then we've got a couple of teams that are rowing the Taliska Atlantic Challenge. And so these are people that have pushed themselves out of their norm. And so it doesn't matter that you've got a desk job. Push yourself out there. Go for that walk. Go for the run that you talk about. Go somewhere there you haven't been before. My New Year's resolution with my wife this year is to walk a mountain a month. And for me, that's pushing our boundaries a little bit physically, a little bit mentally, getting the map back out. But also it's allowed me to go out and see parts of our country that I may never have seen before. So just push your limits, little steps at a time.
Brilliant, no, absolutely. And I know we've got Chris on the group who took part in the Taliska Challenge last time around and has got some pretty hoofing photos from there. In terms of mountains, obviously Charlie and I are doing Kilimanjaro for charity, and don't forget the link is on the page. So if you want to sponsor that, you can. I'll never miss an opportunity to say that. For those of us who have not served and want to help soldiers who have fallen on hard times and struggle to transition back into public life, what can we do to help?
So I think it's reaching out. We have quite a good transition program, career transition workshop that all our soldiers will attend, and usually quite a good package. I don't know enough about how you could reach in, but the use of social media nowadays and groups like Gav's one here is fantastic opportunities of getting out there and showing that you're there.
Fantastic. And then I think we've got two more questions. They're pretty short ones. First one is about changing trade. This comes up a lot from lads who are either thinking of joining, but they haven't got the calls they want, and they're thinking they can get into training, get the calls and change during training. I'm led to believe that's not something you can do in phase 1 or 2. And then also lads that are at a unit and they are looking at changing trade, but being told it's not possible. What are the actual rules on that, and what action can they take?
So I won't give a definitive answer on the basic training. So I know there is some movement in basic training, but not usually if you haven't met the educational start state. So I won't give too much more on that, other than to make sure that you ask when you are there. With regards to once you're in the field army, there's now a new system that you can use online, which allows you to demonstrate your want to transfer and the availability of that to happen. Mm-hmm. So sometimes people would have been protective and your request to transfer might have disappeared, and we'll try it again because they want to maintain manning in their units. Well, this has been taken out of control. And as we put more and more apps online, there is now a talent management app that will allow you to put your details in and understand if there's transfer opportunities available and what you'd need to do to get there. So it's becoming more transparent now.
And where can that be at? Is that on Defence Connect or?
Yes, it's on Defence Connect under the career management app, and there's a transfer tab on there.
Perfect. That's brilliant. Thanks. I know we're very short time. Very final question, and it's a pretty quick one. What made you want to be Army Sergeant Major, and is it living up to your expectations? How are you finding it?
So it was, I think I'll start when I was Regimental Sergeant Major and I saw the Command Sergeant Major network and the impact that they were having, the ability to see the wider, broader army is what really intrigued me. And that ability, and my predecessor's line of rank being an opportunity to do more for your people, and that's what I wanted to do. And I've been fortunate enough that I was a Command Sergeant Major at 3 Division at Field Army, and then to be the Army Sergeant Major is just absolutely amazing. To be able to have those moments where you chat to a soldier in 1 minute and you're relaying that information through to a general is just truly powerful. And we won't change the world completely, but we can slowly chip away at it and make sure that our soldiers' voices are getting where they need to go.
Brilliant. Army Sergeant Major, thanks so much for making the trip up here. It's been great talking to you. We've got a mug, a Lads Advice mug for you to take away with you, and we'll have a chat about the annual dinner on the way to the car. But it's a real pleasure to meet you, and thanks ever so much for coming over to Cambridge.
No, thanks for reaching out. It's been a real pleasure, and best of luck to everyone.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Got Your Six, Lads Advice Encounters with me, Gav Topley, and the Army Sergeant Major, Paul Carney. The Army Sergeant Major has asked me to let you know that he is approachable and contactable, and you can get hold of him on Twitter, where his handle is @Army Sergeant Major, @ARMYSGTMAJOR, and for service personnel, his details are also available on Defence Connect. If you'd like to contact the podcast, you can reach us on Facebook, the group's Lads Advice, on Insta, lads_advice, or on Twitter, advice_lads. If you'd like to support our fundraising for Papyrus Prevention of Young Suicide, please visit www.justgiving.com/fundraising/Chaz and Gav /Killy. If you have comments, suggestions, or have guest suggestions for the show, you can email us on ladsadvice@hotmail.com. And finally, if you'd like to support the upkeep of this show and the group, you can do so at patreon.com/Gav Topley. Thanks for joining, and we'll see you next Sunday.